Emily's front porch, her voice unwavering despite her evident anger. "Emily Carter is a good woman, and this is her home. This is outrageous." Reynolds straightened up, his expression hardening as he replied, "Ma'am, we've received a report and we're acting accordingly. If there's been a mistake, it will be resolved at the station." The crowd murmured louder, their discontent growing. Another neighbor, James, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor, stepped forward. "Officer, you've got the wrong person. Emily's lived here for years. Maybe you should check your facts before dragging someone out like this." Reynolds ignored the comment, his focus solely on getting Emily to the patrol car. The more the neighbors protested, the more defiant he seemed. Martinez, however, looked increasingly uncomfortable. He glanced at Reynolds, then back at the crowd, his hesitation evident. "Reynolds," Martinez finally muttered under his breath, "maybe we should double-check. This doesn't feel right." Reynolds shot him a sharp look. "Stay in line, Martinez. We're handling this." As Emily was forced into the patrol car, her mind raced. She knew this wasn't just about a misunderstanding. It was about perception, prejudice, and a systemic issue that went beyond her current situation. Her thoughts shifted to her husband, Captain Marcus Carter, the man who had worked tirelessly to foster trust and justice within the community. She knew he would be her advocate in this fight. Inside the car, Emily's heart ached for Nathan. She thought about his birthday, the joy he had been feeling moments before this nightmare unfolded. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would fight for her son, for herself, and for every person who had ever been unjustly treated. Back at the house, Nathan clung to Ms. Lisa, sobbing uncontrollably. "I want my mom," he cried, his small voice breaking through the commotion. Ms. Lisa held him tightly, whispering soothing words, though her own heart was breaking at the sight of Emily being taken away. Mrs. Linda, James, and a few other neighbors gathered together, their collective frustration turning into determination. "We can't let this slide," Mrs. Linda said firmly. "We need to stand up for Emily." The crowd began dispersing, but not before many of them vowed to support Emily. Phones buzzed as videos of the incident were shared online, spreading the word about the injustice that had occurred. At the police station, Emily sat in a holding cell, her hands still cuffed. She kept her head high, refusing to let the humiliation break her spirit. She demanded to make a phone call, her voice steady as she spoke to the officer on duty. "I need to speak to Captain Marcus Carter," she said firmly. The officer hesitated, recognizing the name. "Captain Carter?" "Yes," Emily replied, her gaze unwavering. "He's my husband." The officer's expression shifted from skepticism to shock. Without another word, he picked up the phone and dialed Captain Carter's number. Within minutes, Marcus arrived at the station, his commanding presence filling the room. His uniform was crisp, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He locked eyes with Reynolds, who immediately recognized him. "Captain Carter," Reynolds stammered, his confidence wavering. Marcus raised a hand to silence him. "Save it. What is going on here?" His voice was calm but carried a weight that made everyone in the room stop. Reynolds stumbled through an explanation, his words faltering as Marcus listened intently. Emily remained silent, watching her husband with a mixture of relief and pride. When Reynolds finished, Marcus turned to his wife. "Emily," he said gently, "are you okay?" She nodded, her voice soft but resolute. "I'm fine now." Marcus turned back to Reynolds, his tone sharp. "This is unacceptable. You arrested an innocent woman based on a single call without verifying any facts. Did you even bother to check her ID or speak to the neighbors?" Reynolds stuttered. "Sir, You made a mistake," Marcus interrupted. "And you've humiliated my wife in front of her son and the entire neighborhood. This isn't just about Emily. It's about how you conduct yourselves as officers of the law. Martinez finally spoke up, his voice filled with regret. Captain, I knew something was wrong. I should have said something. Marcus looked at him, his expression softening slightly. Acknowledging your mistake is the first step. Learn from it. Turning back to Reynolds, Marcus's voice grew stern. You'll be held accountable for this. I'll make sure of it. As the situation was resolved, Emily was released and Marcus escorted her out of the station. The neighbors' videos had already gone viral, sparking widespread outrage and calls for justice. The incident became a turning point for the community, a stark reminder of the importance of standing together against injustice. Later that evening, Emily and Marcus returned home, where Nathan ran into his mother's arms, sobbing with relief. Emily held him tightly, whispering words of comfort. The birthday celebration resumed, albeit with a heavier heart. But as the evening progressed, the house once again filled with laughter and love. The neighbors came together, offering their support and solidarity, turning a day that had started with heartbreak into one of hope and unity. Emily knew the road ahead would be challenging, but she also knew she wasn't alone. With her family, her neighbors, and her community by her side, she was ready to fight for a better future, one where no one would have to endure what she had experienced. It would be okay, but the cold steel of the handcuffs and the locked door separated them. Her tears, which she had tried so hard to hold back, began to fall silently as she pressed her forehead against the window, looking at her son with eyes full of love and pain. "Mommy's here, Nathan," she whispered, though she knew he couldn't hear her. "I'm here, baby." The crowd grew restless. The sight of the crying child and Emily's visible anguish seemed to ignite a collective anger among the neighbors. Mrs. Linda stepped forward again, her voice sharp and unwavering as she addressed Reynolds and Martinez. "Enough is enough," she exclaimed. "How can you do this to a mother in front of her child? Look at that boy. Is this what justice looks like to you?" The murmurs in the crowd turned into a wave of shouts. People began calling out to the officers, demanding that they release Emily. "This is wrong," one man yelled. "You're traumatizing that kid." Another neighbor, holding her phone high, added, "This video is going viral. You'll have to answer for this." Martinez looked visibly shaken now, his resolve crumbling under the weight of the crowd's anger. He turned to Reynolds, his voice tense. "John, we need to rethink this. This isn't right and you know it. Look around you." Reynolds tightened his jaw, his grip on control slipping as he tried to assert his authority. "I'm just doing my job. This is procedure," he barked back, though even his voice betrayed a hint of doubt. But Emily, even in her most vulnerable moment, found the strength to speak. She leaned toward the window, her voice steady but filled with raw emotion. "Officer Martinez," she called out, locking eyes with him through the glass. "You know this is wrong. You can feel it. Don't let fear or loyalty to a flawed system stop you from doing the right thing. Please, think about what you're teaching my son, what you're showing all these people about what justice really means. We have to address the fact that most workers may not have the best work-life balance, may also have a hard time doing the right thing." Martinez froze, her words hitting him like a blow. He glanced at the crowd, then at Nathan, whose tiny fists still banged on the window in desperation. The sound seemed to echo in his ears, drowning out everything else. Finally, Martinez took a step forward. "John," he said, his voice resolute this time, "we need to let her go. This is her house. The neighbors are saying it. The decorations, the child, everything adds up. We need to admit we made a mistake." Reynolds shot him a sharp glare. "Are you questioning my authority? Do you want to explain this mess to the department?" Martinez didn't flinch. I'd rather explain this than live with the guilt of ruining an innocent family's life. We're supposed to protect people, not tear them apart." The crowd erupted in support, their voices rising in agreement. Reynolds hesitated, his face a mixture of frustration and defeat. He looked at Emily, then at Nathan, and finally back at Martinez. With a heavy sigh, he pulled the keys from his belt and walked to the car. The tension in the air was almost unbearable as he unlocked the door and removed Emily's handcuffs. "You are free to go," Reynolds muttered, barely able to meet Emily's eyes. Emily stepped out of the car, her hands trembling but her head held high. She turned to face the crowd, her neighbors cheering and clapping in relief and triumph. Nathan ran to her, throwing his arms around her waist and sobbing into her dress. "Mom, I thought they were going to take you away," he cried. She knelt down, holding him tightly. "I'm here, baby. I'm not going anywhere." Mrs. Linder approached, placing a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder. "We've got your back," she said firmly. "They won't get away with this." Reynolds and Martinez stood awkwardly by the patrol car, surrounded by an angry and watchful crowd. Martinez, though, stepped forward and addressed Emily directly. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice sincere. "We made a mistake. I made a mistake. I thought we were doing well." Emily looked at him, her eyes still filled with the pain of what had just happened. "It's not just about me," she said softly but firmly. "This kind of mistake happens far too often. If you're really sorry, do something to change it." Martinez nodded, her words striking a chord. Reynolds, however, remained silent, his gaze fixed on the ground. As Emily and Nathan walked back into their home, surrounded by supportive neighbors, the crowd began to disperse, but not without promises to hold the officers accountable. Videos of the incident were already being shared online, accompanied by hashtags demanding justice and reform. Inside, Emily sat down with Nathan, holding him close as he finally began to calm down. She stroked his hair gently, her resolve strengthening with every passing moment. This wasn't the end of the fight. It was just the beginning. The crowd erupted in a mix of triumph and outrage, their shouts louder now. "We told you, you wouldn't listen," someone yelled, their voice shaking with anger. Another person added, "This is what happens when you let prejudice cloud your judgment." Reynolds's face turned red, a mix of embarrassment and frustration. He stood stiffly for a moment, as though weighing his next move. Martinez stepped forward, his voice firm but measured. "John, we need to release her now. This has gone too far." Reynolds hesitated, gripping the patrol car's door handle tightly before finally yanking it open. Emily stepped out, her hands still cuffed but her head held high. She looked directly at Reynolds, her gaze unwavering. "You should be ashamed of yourself," she said, her voice calm but cutting. "You let your bias lead you, and you put my son through hell because of it." Reynolds said nothing as Martinez quickly moved to uncuff her, his hands shaking slightly as he fumbled with the key. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he muttered, avoiding her eyes. Emily rubbed her sore wrists, but her attention immediately shifted to Nathan, who broke free from Mrs. Linda's arms and ran to her. She knelt, scooping him up as he sobbed into her shoulder. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, holding him tightly. "Mommy's here. Everything's gonna be okay." The crowd erupted into applause and cheers of support, surrounding Emily and Nathan in a protective circle. Mrs. Linda placed a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder. "We're with you," she said firmly. "You don't have to go through this alone." Martinez turned to Reynolds, his voice low but resolute. "We should have handled this differently. This wasn't right." Reynolds looked away, his jaw tight, but he didn't respond. Emily stood, holding Nathan in her arms, and addressed the crowd. "Thank you all for standing by me and my family today. This isn't just about what happened to me. It's about what happens to so many of us. We can't let this keep happening. We have to hold people accountable." The crowd cheered louder, their voices rising in unity. Several people waved their phones, signaling that the footage of the incident would soon make its way online. As Reynolds and Martinez retreated to their patrol car, Emily turned to Nathan, her voice gentle but firm. "See, baby? When we stand up for what's right, we can make a difference." Nathan looked up at her, his tear-streaked face breaking into a small smile. "You were so brave, Mommy," he said, hugging her tightly. Emily smiled back, though her eyes were still filled with determination. "We both were, sweetheart. And we'll keep being brave, no matter what." As they walked back toward their home, surrounded by supportive neighbors, Emily knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of a larger fight for justice. Not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been wronged. She held Nathan close, her steps steady, her heart unyielding. Together they would face whatever came next, a voice gentle but filled with emotion. "I'm sorry, Emily. You didn't deserve this. None of you did." Nathan, still clutching Emily tightly, looked up at his father. His small voice broke through the murmurs of the crowd. "Daddy, they put handcuffs on Mommy. They didn't listen to her. Why didn't they listen?" William crouched down, his voice tender but filled with a weight of responsibility. "I don't know, son, but I promise you, I'll do everything I can to make sure it doesn't happen again." He gently placed a hand on Nathan's head, his gaze shifting to Emily. "We'll make this right." The crowd, moved by the family's resolve, began to chant, "Justice for Emily, justice for all." Their voices filled the air, a powerful show of solidarity that reverberated through the neighborhood. Emily, still holding Nathan, turned to the crowd. "Thank you for standing with us today. This isn't just my fight, it's ours. Together we can demand better, not just for ourselves, but for every family, every child, and every community that's been wronged." The cheers grew louder as Emily's words inspired hope and unity among those gathered. Mrs. Linda stepped forward, her voice carrying over the noise. "Emily, we're with you every step of the way. This community won't let you fight this alone." Reynolds and Martinez stood off to the side, the weight of their actions now fully visible on their faces. Martinez, looking deeply regretful, approached William hesitantly. "Sir, I let my fear and pressure override my judgment. I know an apology won't fix what we did, but I'm sorry." William studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable, before finally responding. "It's not me you need to apologize to. It's her." Emily regarded him coolly. "An apology is a start, but actions speak louder than words. If you mean it, make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Ever." Martinez nodded, humbled, and stepped back. Meanwhile, Reynolds avoided eye contact, his face a mix of shame and stubbornness. William shot him a pointed look. "You'd better think long and hard about how you conduct yourself from now on, Officer Reynolds. This job is about protecting people, not tearing them down." As the crowd began to disperse, neighbors approached Emily, offering words of support and encouragement. Nathan clung to his mother, his tears finally subsiding as he felt the warmth of the community around them. William stayed close by, his protective presence a comfort to both Emily and Nathan. "This isn't over," he said quietly to Emily. "We'll file a formal complaint and make sure the department conducts a full review." Emily nodded, her resolve unshaken. "Good. This needs to be a wake-up call, not just for them, but for the entire system." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the scene, Emily looked at her family and her neighbors. Despite the pain and humiliation she had endured, she felt a sense of hope. This was more than just a personal victory. It was the start of something bigger. Together, they would demand justice and fight for a world where no one had to face such indignities again. Confined to just the neighborhood anymore, it spread across the city and beyond, sparking conversations about systemic prejudice and the need for reform. Social media platforms were flooded with posts demanding accountability from the police department, with users tagging local officials and law enforcement agencies. Emily, though overwhelmed by the sudden attention, remained focused. She sat in her living room, surrounded by her family, as calls poured in from reporters, activists, and even legal advocates offering their support. Nathan clung to her side, his small hand in hers, while William paced the room, his phone constantly ringing. "We have to be strategic about this," William said, pausing to look at Emily. "This isn't just about the department. It's about making sure real change happens." Emily nodded, her gaze steady. "I'll talk to the media, but I want the focus to stay on the bigger issue, not just my story. This has to be about everyone who has been silenced, everyone who hasn't had the chance to speak up." Later that day, Emily agreed to an interview with a local news station. Sitting on her front porch, the very place where the incident had occurred, she spoke calmly but with unwavering conviction. "This isn't about punishing a few officers," she said. "It's about addressing the culture that allows these mistakes to keep happening. My story is one of many, and we need to create a system where no one else has to endure this." Her words resonated deeply, and soon rallies were organized in her name. People from all walks of life gathered in the city square, holding signs that read, "Justice for Emily," "End Racial Profiling," and "Accountability Now." Activists took the stage, amplifying Emily's message and calling for legislative reforms. Meanwhile, within the police department, the pressure was mounting. Captain Carter, true to his word, launched an internal investigation. Officers Reynolds and Martinez were suspended indefinitely, pending a full review of their actions. The department issued a public apology, but the community demanded more than words. They wanted concrete changes. In a public meeting held at the local community center, Emily stood alongside William and other leaders from the neighborhood. The room was packed, with standing room only as residents shared their own experiences of racial bias and mistreatment. Emily listened intently, taking notes and nodding in solidarity. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped to the podium, her voice strong and clear. "I'm grateful for the outpouring of support," she began. "But this fight isn't just mine. It's ours. It's about ensuring that no one else has to endure what I did, that no child has to see their parent treated like a criminal for simply existing in their own home." Her words were met with a standing ovation, and as she stepped down, she felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about her family anymore. It was about creating a lasting impact. Over the next few weeks, Emily became a prominent voice in the movement for justice. She worked closely with community leaders, lawyers, and activists to draft proposals for policy changes within the police department, including mandatory bias training, improved accountability measures, and a transparent process for handling complaints. William, using his position within the department, pushed for these changes from the inside, facing resistance but refusing to back down. "This is about restoring trust," he said during a heated departmental meeting. "If we don't address the root causes, we'll lose the faith of the very people we're sworn to protect." The movement gained momentum, with Emily's story serving as a catalyst for broader conversations about racial justice. News outlets continued to follow her journey, and her speeches at rallies and public forums drew large crowds. Her resilience and determination inspired others to speak out, turning a moment of personal pain into a powerful call for change. Months later, The City Council passed a series of reforms aimed at addressing systemic bias in law enforcement. Emily stood in the front row during the announcement, holding Nathan's hand as the mayor acknowledged her role in sparking the change. "This is just the beginning," Emily said to a reporter after the event. "We've taken a step forward, but there's so much more work to be done. Change doesn't happen overnight. It happens when we keep pushing, keep fighting, and never give up." As she walked away, surrounded by her family and the community that had rallied around her, Emily felt a deep sense of purpose. She had turned her pain into power, her silence into a voice that demanded to be heard, and she knew that this was only the start of a much larger journey. The story of Emily's ordeal quickly moved beyond the confines of her neighborhood, spreading like wildfire across the country. The public outrage sparked a wave of reactions that could not be ignored. That same afternoon, Captain William Carter, Emily's husband and a respected leader of the Westwood Police Department, addressed the nation. Standing outside the police station, surrounded by cameras and journalists, he prepared to take responsibility and outline the path forward. William stood tall at the podium, his police uniform immaculate, yet his expression heavy with the weight of responsibility. His voice, steady and resolute, echoed through the crowd. "On behalf of the Westwood Police Department, I extend my deepest apologies to Emily Carter, her family, and the entire community. What happened was not just a failure on an individual level, but a systemic one. This is unacceptable." The gravity of his words held the room in silence as he continued. Effective immediately, the two officers involved in this incident, John Reynolds and Michael Martinez, have been suspended pending a thorough and transparent internal investigation. This investigation will ensure accountability, and those responsible for any wrongdoing will face appropriate consequences. William's voice grew stronger as he made a commitment that resonated beyond the immediate situation. "This is not merely about two individuals, it is about a system in need of change. I pledge that the Westwood Police Department will implement comprehensive reforms. These include mandatory training on unconscious bias and fair treatment, as well as the establishment of an independent oversight mechanism to monitor police actions. We will not rest until trust and accountability are restored." As his words concluded, the press conference transitioned from an apology to a declaration of reform. For many, it was a glimmer of hope, a sign that the system could indeed be changed with the right leadership and community pressure. On social media, hashtags like "Justice for Emily" and "End Racial Profiling" dominated discussions. The viral video of Emily's wrongful handcuffing, recorded by neighbors, became a rallying cry for justice. Messages of support poured in, many thanking Emily for her courage to speak out. Strangers shared their own stories of discrimination, drawing strength from her resilience. The two officers, Reynolds and Martinez, faced intense scrutiny. Reynolds, who had tried to justify his actions as procedural, was widely criticized for his lack of empathy and professionalism. Photos of him circulated online, accompanied by biting commentary about his behavior. Martinez, though slightly more sympathetic due to his visible discomfort during the incident, was not spared from accountability. While some defended him for trying to intervene, others criticized his failure to take a firmer stand in the moment. Emily, meanwhile, became a symbol of resistance and hope. Media outlets sought her out for interviews, and she used her newfound platform to amplify the voices of others who had experienced injustice. In one live interview, she stated with determination, "This isn't just my story, it's the story of countless others who have been silenced or ignored. I'm grateful my voice was heard, but real change requires collective action." Her case inspired police departments across the country to reevaluate their policies. Discussions on bias, transparency, and accountability gained momentum. Some departments began implementing reforms similar to those promised by William in Westwood. Emily's story was not just about one woman. It became a catalyst for a broader movement toward fairness and justice. Back in Westwood, the neighborhood transformed from a place of tension to a beacon of solidarity. The evening after the press conference, neighbors gathered outside Emily and William's house, bringing food, flowers, and heartfelt words of encouragement. The atmosphere was warm, a stark contrast to the hostility of the previous day. Children played on the lawn, and adults shared stories and laughter, reaffirming their commitment to unity. Inside the house, Emily prepared tea, her heart full of gratitude for the support she had received. When she stepped onto the porch with a tray of steaming cups, the crowd fell silent, their eyes filled with respect. Mrs. Linda, one of the neighbors who had stood by Emily from the beginning, stepped forward and took her hand. Her voice trembled with emotion as she said, "Emily, you're not just our neighbor, you're the heart of this community. Your strength has inspired us all." Emily's voice wavered as she responded, "Thank you all. I couldn't have faced yesterday without your support. You stood up for me and my family, and that means everything." The crowd erupted into applause, voices rising in a chorus of solidarity. Nathan, who had witnessed his mother's ordeal with fear and confusion, now looked up at her with admiration. Running into her arms, he whispered, "Mom, you're okay now, right?" Emily held him tightly, tears streaming down her face as she reassured him, "Yes, sweetheart, we're okay now, and we'll make sure others are too." William joined them, placing a hand on Emily's shoulder and looking out at the crowd. "We're a strong family," he said, his voice steady. "And together we'll ensure that nothing like this happens again. Not to us, not to anyone." One of the younger neighbors spoke up, their voice carrying the sentiment of the group. "Emily, William, you're not alone. We're all family here, and we won't let this kind of injustice stand." Emily stood tall, her voice clear as she addressed the crowd. "Yesterday I said change starts with the community. Today you've proven me right. Together we can confront injustice, speak out, and ensure no one is left behind. This is just the beginning," William added. "And as a leader in the police department, I promise to ensure justice is served. But that can only happen with your continued support. Our unity is our greatest strength." The gathering ended with renewed resolve. As the neighbors departed, the sense of community remained strong, and the resolve for justice unshaken. Inside their home, Emily and William stood together, watching Nathan play with the birthday toys he had set aside during the chaos. William turned to Emily, his voice steady but full of emotion. "This isn't the end, you know that, right?" Emily nodded, her eyes burning with determination. "Yes, but it's the beginning, and we won't stop, not for ourselves, but for everyone who needs us." Under the warm light of their porch, they stood, hand in hand, a family united in love and purpose. Their story was not just a tale of injustice, but a testament to the power of resilience, community, and the fight for a fairer society. Justice was not a distant dream. It was a reality they were determined to achieve, together.